Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an impressive and chilling story. Let's meet Thatcher Holloway, a skeptical college professor who died for 13 minutes and came back with a shocking revelation about the last 30 days before Christ's return. What he saw on the other side will completely change his view of the future of humanity. Signs in the sky, a great spiritual awakening and the truth that no one wants to accept. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. My name is Thatcher Holloway, and if you had met me a few months ago, you would never have imagined that I would be telling you something like this. Until recently, I believed that the universe was just a set of equations and probabilities, that there was no creator, and that faith was just a psychological mechanism to comfort the weak. My world was rational, predictable, and safe, until the night I died. I'm not a preacher. I never went. I passed more than 2 decades teaching philosophy at the University of Denver, arguing against the existence of God, the soul, and anything that could not be measured or proven empirically. I was known for being a ruthless debater. I debunked religious arguments in packed auditoriums, challenged priests, rabbis, pastors, and anyone who dared to present faith as an absolute reality. But something happened to me, something that challenged all my beliefs. It was an ordinary October night. Autumn covered Denver with its golden blanket, and I was home alone. My daughter, Madeline, I was in the college dorm, and silence reigned in the room. I grabbed a glass of whiskey and a book by Bertrand Russell, as I did so often. My cell phone vibrated next to the armchair, and I saw a message from Maddie. Maddie, Dad, don't forget to eat right, okay? I love you. I smiled slightly and typed a quick reply. I love you too, darling. Good night. Then it happened. One crushing pain. It grabbed my chest, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart with all its strength. The glass of whiskey fell to the floor, and the book slipped from my lap. I tried to get up, but my legs gave way. A wave of heat rose to my face. My left arm began to tingle, and my vision became blurry. It can't be, I thought, desperately. I knew exactly what was happening. A heart attack. I tried to reach for my cell phone, but my fingers wouldn't obey me. The world around me started to spin. Everything was blurry. The sound of the city outside, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Everything dissolved into a distant noise. And then, the darkness swallowed me. That's how I died. But death was not the end. It was the beginning of something that would change my life forever. Darkness was not just the absence of light. It was an absolute void, an absence of time, of sound, of existence. It was as if I had been ripped away from reality and thrown into a borderless abyss. For a moment, or an eternity, I don't know, there was nothing. No consciousness, no thoughts, just an oppressive, infinite silence. Then something changed. A strange sensation ran through my mind, as if my EU was rebuilding itself from nothing. It was like waking up from a deep dream and not remembering who you are, where you are, or even what does it mean to exist. Little by little, my consciousness returned, but my body wasn't there. I was floating, suspended in an undefined space. There was no floor, no ceiling, no horizon, just one dull gray, no light, no shadows. My first thought was, I'm dreaming, but it wasn't a dream. There was a clarity that no dream could ever achieve. Then I looked down and saw my own body. I was there, on the living room floor, motionless, the spilled glass of whiskey, the cell phone lying next to my hand. Time seemed frozen. I saw my chest rise and fall slowly, or was that just an illusion? I saw my eyes half open, glassy, and suddenly, a sound, a distant beep, insistent. Red and blue lights flashed around me. Voices echoed, but they seemed so far away. Weak pulse, charging, 200 joules. Shock. I felt a bump, but it wasn't on my body. It was on me, as if something had tried to pull me back, without success. Nothing. Again. Another shock. Another pull. This time I was sucked upwards, as if something invisible ripped me out of that space and flung me away. And then, the light appeared, but it was no ordinary light. It wasn't white or gold. It was alive, and I was being taken to her. The light around me was not just a glow. It was a presence. It pulsed, moved as if it had a life of its own. but it didn't hurt my eyes. On the contrary, it was welcoming, involving, like I was being enveloped by something bigger than I could ever understand. I no longer felt pain. There was no fear, just a feeling of lightness, as if my being were free of any weight. My physical body, it didn't matter anymore. I era a pure consciousness, floating towards an unknown destination. The reality around me began to change. The undefined space dissolved, and I was transported to a different environment. There was no ceiling, no floor, no horizon, just an ethereal, indescribable vastness. It was then that I heard a voice. It wasn't a voice like a human voice, with vibration and sound. It was something much deeper, something that communicated directly within me. I didn't just hear, I felt every word echoing in the core of my existence. Thatcher, my name. I turned around and saw him. He was not like he was in the paintings, nor as he was imagined in the philosophical debates that ridiculed faith. He was different. His presence was at the same time overwhelming and peaceful. A light emanated from him, but it was not just light. It was something that conveyed absolute love, infinite understanding, and unchanging justice at the same time. If I had a physical body at that moment, I would have fallen to my knees. But he didn't need to say anything. He just looked at me. And in that look, I saw everything. My whole life. Every thought, every decision, every moment of arrogance and skepticism. I saw the words I used to mock the faith of others. The debates where I destroyed beliefs with sharp logic. The opportunities I had to love and chose to ignore. I was a dead man before eternity. And for the first time, I understood how wrong I was. But there was no condemnation in that look. There was no hate, just true. And then he spoke again. Time is short. You must see. Before I could ask anything, the space around us changed. One moment, I was floating beside him, and the next, I was standing in front of a huge room, full of translucent displays that extended in all directions. Each display showed a piece of the world: New York, London, Tokyo, deserts, forests, oceans. It was as if every part of the planet was being monitored at the same time. And then, I understood. I was about to see the future. Jesus turned to me and said, "I'll show you the last 30 days before I come back." And the visions began. The observation room around me seemed to pulse with energy. Each viewfinder showed a part of the world. But what I saw, it wasn't the present, it was the future. A future that would unfold before humanity's eyes, signaling the imminent return of Christ. Jesus stood by my side, and without needing words, the visions began. The first display glowed, revealing a clear blue sky. But something was wrong. The sun, it didn't shine as usual. It pulsed. The first sign, Jesus said, his voice echoing inside me. The sun will herald the beginning of the last 30 days. I watched as the sun began to emit unknown light explosions. These were no ordinary solar flares. They were geometric patterns of energy, visible to the naked eye. Aurora borealis began to appear all over the planet, even in the tropics and the equator, places where this phenomenon should never occur. Journalists and scientists tried to explain. Hypotheses about solar activity, magnetic fields, and even gravitational anomalies were debated frantically on TV. But no one could give a definitive answer. The world watched, intrigued. Some people marveled at the beauty of the lights dancing in the sky. Others felt a strange shiver, as if they instinctively knew that it wasn't normal. And then, something else happened. The dawns began to break, take shapes. Mysterious silhouettes appeared in the lights, human shapes, grand as if something was being revealed. Many fell to their knees. Others laughed, calling it mass hysteria. "This is just an unusual atmospheric effect," said the experts. Nothing to worry about. But the restlessness grew. Something was to come. The display changed, showing the planet a week later. This time, the commotion was global. People were beginning to realize that something had changed. It was as if an invisible veil had been torn. Atheists, skeptics, people who had never believed in the supernatural. Suddenly, they were starting to feel and see things they couldn't explain. "The Spirit will be poured out on all flesh," said Jesus as I saw the crowds reacting. Thousands of reports appeared on the internet. Young people saw lights and shadows moving around them. Adults heard voices calling their names in the silence of the night. Children pointed to nothing and said they saw angels. The boundaries between the spiritual and physical worlds were disappearing. Churches began to fill up, but not like before. People went looking for real answers. They wanted to know what was happening. They wanted to understand if there was something beyond this life, but not everyone accepted. Many, scared and hardened, they closed even more. They said it was a psychological phenomenon, that humanity was in collective hysteria. The division began. The display flashed again, and a new scene appeared before me. Charismatic leaders were emerging all over the world. They were different from each other, but they had something in common, a message from peace and unity, but without regret, without Christ. Rulers, business people, even some influential religious figures came together in a powerful speech. The signs we see are a call for humanity to evolve. We must unite, forget divisions and outdated beliefs. True love does not need religion. The people embraced this idea. It sounded good. Who could be against peace and unity? But something was wrong. There was no God in it. It was an illusion. Jesus looked at me, and in his gaze was pain. The world will seek answers where there is no truth. The great disappointment had begun. Suddenly, thousands, no millions, of people around the world began to have dreams and visions. They saw the future. They saw the truth. Some saw Jesus returning. Others saw the separation between those who followed him and those who rejected his word. But not everyone understood what they saw. Some distorted the visions, trying to interpret them according to their own desires. Others denied, saying they were just dreams. But the message was being sent to everyone. The preparation was almost complete. Jesus touched my shoulder, and the visors disappeared. What I had seen was just the beginning. I was shaking. He looked into my eyes and said, "There is still more to see." The world was about to split irreversibly. The final separation was approaching. The environment around us has changed again. The display now showed images that seemed superimposed. Churches full, while others were empty and crumbling. Religious leaders were conflicted. Something profound was happening in people's faith. Jesus looked at me and said, "The time for separation has come." I didn't understand right away. Then I saw it. The religious world was in shock. What was once a large homogeneous group, churches, congregations, denominations, now divided. But it was not a common division, like doctrinal differences. It wasn't about churches or traditions. It was about the heart of each person. In the United States, large denominations were in crisis. Some bowed to the messages of charismatic leaders, embracing the idea of a new world without judgment, without repentance, without Christ. Others resisted. The division was brutal and visible. People who used to worship together now turned against each other. Religious leaders distorted the scriptures to justify their changes. Churches that were once full, they emptied themselves, while small groups of believers, persecuted and ridiculed, grew spiritually stronger. I saw a renowned pastor in New York say to a crowd, "God's love is for everyone. There is no right or wrong. Who are we to say what a sin is?" The auditorium erupted in applause. But then, I saw another scene. In a dark basement, a small group of Christians met in secret, crying, praying, reading the word in silence. They knew something bigger was coming. The world was fragmented between those who sought the truth and those who chose illusion. It was the beginning of the definitive spiritual separation. A woman appeared on the display. She was on her knees, screaming in despair. "I'm a Christian, I always have been. I went to church, I did charity, I volunteered. Why am I feeling this darkness around me?" Jesus looked at me and said, "Not everyone who says, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom." Then I understood. It wasn't enough have religion. It wasn't enough have morality. The separation was not between churches or religions. It was between those who really knew Christ and those who only followed him by tradition. Those who were deeply connected to him, they felt a supernatural love strengthening them. Even persecuted, even isolated, they were at peace. But those who just performed rituals, without a real relationship with God, they felt an emptiness growing inside them, and that terrified them. With each passing day, the separation became more evident. Faithful churches were ridiculed and persecuted. Fake religious leaders gained more power and influence. Millions of people were trapped in doubt, to follow what seemed to be the path of unity and acceptance, or to follow the truth, even if it cost everything. The division was irreversible. Jesus sighed and said with regret, "They made their choice." The display went out. The silence was heavy. My mind tried to process what I had seen. I knew there were already divisions in the spiritual world. but I never thought it would be like this. And then, Jesus spoke again. Now, something even bigger comes. The greatest test of humanity's faith was about to happen. The display before me glowed again, and I was overcome with a new vision. The world had changed even more. Something profound and unexpected was happening to those who remained faithful to God. They were no longer just external signs or cosmic events. People's hearts were changing. Jesus stood by my side, and I could feel a different weight in his presence, as if there was something sacred and indescribable happening. Forgiveness will be the last test of true love, he said. So, I saw it. A world transformed by love. It was as if an invisible wave was traveling across the earth. People previously separated by hatred, disagreements, and betrayals began to reconcile. I saw a man who had been carrying a deadly grudge against his brother for 30 years kneel down and cry asking for forgiveness. His brother, taken by a force greater than himself, hugged him and they both sobbed, feeling a peace they had never experienced before. I saw churches divided for decades, separated by doctrines and internal disputes, unite in repentance and humility. I saw pastors confessing past mistakes and entire congregations being taken by a supernatural compassion. True love did not come from the flesh. It was something bigger. It was like an invisible presence was touching hearts. But I knew what it was. I saw Jesus reach out to one of the displays and say, "This is the sign that no one can fake." Supernatural love was upon the world. I've never felt this before. One scene caught my attention. I saw a man in his house, alone, with his hands shaking. He was holding a bottle of drink, the same one that had accompanied him every night for years. His eyes were empty, tired. He carried guilt and regret that he had never confessed to anyone. Then, without explanation, started crying. He dropped the bottle, fell to his knees on the floor, and sobbed like a child. He felt something he couldn't name. A God. He didn't see a light. He didn't have a vision. He didn't hear a voice. But he felt something greater than anything you've ever experienced, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was not alone. He picked up the phone, hands shaking, and called someone he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. I need to ask for forgiveness. And on the other end of the line, the same emotion took over the person who answered. The transformation was real, but not everyone accepts. Then I saw something else. There were those who were being touched by supernatural love, but they resisted. I saw a woman sitting in church, alone, holding the Bible. Her face was tense, as if she was fighting something inside her. She felt the call to forgiveness, but she didn't want to give in. His eyes filled with tears. She knew she needed to forgive her father, who had been cruel to her. But the pain, the pride, the anger still held her back. And then, she got up and left the church without looking back. I felt immense sadness seeing her leave. Jesus looked at me and said, "Love has been offered to everyone, but not everyone will accept it." The last warning. The vision began to disappear. The world was changed. Forgiveness had healed many. Divisions were being dissolved among those who remained faithful, but the separation still continued, because not everyone accepted the transformation. Those who gave in to God's love were preparing. Those who rejected him were hardening their hearts forever. I looked at Jesus, confused, and asked, "What's next?" He answered me in a firm voice, "The greatest test of humanity." And then I was struck by another vision. The display before me glowed with a different intensity. It was no longer a celestial sign, nor a spiritual transformation. This time, what I saw was chaos. The world was falling apart. Jesus remained by my side, but now his expression was serious. I felt in his eyes a mixture of regret and determination. "Everything that seemed safe will begin to crumble," he said. And then, the visions began. The collapse of the world order. The first setting I saw was a corporate building in a big city. A group of men in suits were gathered in a conference room. Their expressions were grim. "The system is collapsing," said one of them. "The market fell 40% in 1 week. The banks don't know what to do." The news spread around the world. Stock markets went into free fall. Coins lost their value. People ran to the banks, trying to withdraw their money, but there was no more money to withdraw. Within days, supermarkets were emptied. Supply trucks stopped coming. I saw streets covered in panic. I saw stores being looted. I saw people who were once peaceful now fighting over a single piece of bread. What shocked me, it wasn't the financial collapse, that's what it revealed about people's hearts. "Security has never been about money," said Jesus, But many trusted him as if he were a god. Now, his god was crumbling, the weakness of human structures. The next scenario was a parliament. Political leaders shouted at each other. Each tried to blame the other for what was happening. I saw a president of a great nation, sitting alone in his office and with his hands on his head. His expression wasn't anger. It was fear. He didn't know what to do. People, once confident in their governments, now they saw that there was no solution. I saw reporters talking on TV. The world faces an unprecedented crisis. The financial system has collapsed. Governments are unstable. And now reports are emerging of a new wave of global violence. The security was disappearing. The final test of faith. The display changed. And I saw churches being attacked. Some were closed out of fear. Others were invaded by angry mobs who, they believed that religion was to blame for the chaos. I saw Christians being dragged out of temples, insulted, persecuted. I saw churches burning. But at the same time, I saw something unexpected. I saw those who truly knew God standing firm. They were not desperate. They didn't run. They didn't hide. I saw a woman in a simple house, with a child on her lap, praying in silence while her door was broken down. I saw a pastor in a public square, on his knees, praying while a crowd surrounded him to beat him. I saw a young woman holding the hand of a friend who was shaking with fear and saying, "Do not be afraid. Our King is returning." They weren't desperate, because they had placed their trust in something greater than this world. Where is your heart? Jesus looked at me and said, "Those who only believed in me when everything was fine will now reveal themselves." The test was not just physical, it was spiritual. The true character of people was being exposed. Those who only followed a superficial faith were abandoning everything. Those who truly knew God were stronger than ever. It was then that I understood. The ordeal wasn't just about hunger, money, or violence. It was about what each one carried within themselves. And then, Jesus said something that chilled me to the core. This is the last call. Those who have not yet chosen will now have to decide once and for all. The display began to darken. Something even bigger was about to happen. The darkness that had taken over the visor began to dissipate. What appeared before me was unlike anything I had seen before. The world was still in chaos, but something was happening to those who truly followed God. I saw, and what I saw, it completely changed my understanding of what it means to be in the presence of God. God's presence becomes visible. The first thing I noticed was the change in people's outlook. In the days before, many were afraid, struggling to keep their faith amid the world's collapse. But now, those who remained faithful glowed. It wasn't a literal light. It was something inside them. Wherever they were, in a house, in a hidden church, in a crisis-torn field, there was a supernatural peace about them. They knew the time had come. I saw a group gathered in a small destroyed church, the pews broken, the windows shattered. But inside, people sang. Yes, they sang. The music. It was not one of despair nor of clamor. It was a victory song. And then I noticed something amazing. The atmosphere around them was different. The light in that church was not like the light of the sun or lamps. It was another thing. Era, the glory of God. Miracles happen without question. The display changed again, and I saw something even more striking. Miracles. They started to happen without anyone asking. I saw a young man with his legs paralyzed get up in the middle of a prayer, without anyone touching him. I saw a woman, consumed by a terminal illness, heal instantly in front of his family, and everyone fell to their knees crying, not from fear, but from amazement at the manifest glory. I saw groups of Christians in hiding, surrounded by armed people ready to kill them, but suddenly, the attackers fell to their knees, crying, without explanation. They the way something made them tremble. They carry my presence. Jesus turned to me and said, "In the final days, my people will no longer need to look for signs. They will be the signs." Christ's followers, they no longer needed to ask for miracles. Themselves became instruments of the supernatural. When they entered a house, peace filled that place. When they passed through the streets, the desperate felt hope. When they spoke, his words had a weight that went beyond human. They carried the presence of God within them. And the world saw, but not everyone accepted. The last call to choose. Even with all these events, some hardened their hearts. I saw people watching miracles happen before their eyes, and yet rejecting the truth. I saw a man watching his own mother being cured of an incurable disease, and even then, he turned away, denying what he had witnessed. I saw a woman being touched by the glory of God in a hidden service, but leaving before finishing, saying it was just psychological manipulation. I saw world leaders, in despair, finally recognizing that something supernatural was happening, but still trying to find scientific explanations to deny the obvious. Jesus sighed beside me and said, "The time for choice is running out. Now the final day will come." The display glowed brightly. The last day before Christ's return had arrived. The shock of return was like being ripped from a place of absolute clarity and thrown back under the weight of flesh and time. Everything was heavy. Everything was slow. The first thing I felt was the irregular sound of a beeping sound, echoing in the dark room. My eyelids felt heavy, and when I finally managed to open my eyes, the hospital's fluorescent light burned my vision. The world was opaque compared to what I had just experienced. "Okay?" Maddie's fragile voice reached me. I slowly turned my head and saw her silhouette, her eyes red from crying. The shock on her face said she hadn't expected to see me awake. "Maddie." My voice was hoarse, as if I hadn't used it in ages. She let out a sob and held my hand, her fingers shaking. You died. It was almost 14 minutes. But now, she couldn't finish the sentence. I wanted to say that I hadn't really died, but the words stuck in my throat, because deep down I knew I had died, and I came back, but I didn't come back alone. The world is not ready for what I have to say over the next few days. Doctors treated me like a walking miracle. Dr. Valerie Whitmore, my cardiologist, tried to explain scientifically how I could have survived that time without oxygen to the brain, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. She knew it didn't make sense. The hospital became a center of attention. Journalists tried to interview me. University students sent messages. College friends wanted to visit me, but I wasn't worried about any of that. My mind was consumed by what I had seen. The last 30 days before Christ's return, they were real. They were not a symbolic vision, nor a dream. They were a warning, and I had to tell. But the question was, who would believe me? The first challenge, everyone's skepticism. When I finally recovered enough to leave the hospital, the battle began. My daughter Maddie looked at me with concern. She wanted to believe me, but how could she? "Dad, you had trauma. You were dead for almost 14 minutes. That could have been a hallucination." I stared at her, trying to find the right words. "Maddie, I saw it. I saw things no one could imagine. I know what's coming. The world needs to know." She shook her head. "And how are you going to tell this without sounding like a lunatic?" And that was exactly the problem. I wanted to hear what I had to say. When I tried to tell the university, I received cold looks. My academic prestige began to erode. The newspapers called me a renowned former professor who suffered post-cardiac arrest delirium. The world, I wasn't ready to believe it. But that didn't change the fact that the clock was ticking. Time was running out, and I couldn't stop. The weight of the mission I was given began to become clear. I needed to tell the world what I had seen, but every attempt seemed futile. The first place I tried to speak was at the university. For years I was respected as a philosophy professor, someone who taught critical thinking and logic. Now, I was seen as a man who had lost his mind. When I was finally allowed to speak, the room was full. Some students were curious. Others just wanted to see the teacher who went crazy with their own eyes. I took a deep breath and began. I died. And when I died, I saw something that changed everything I believed about reality. Jesus Christ showed me the last 30 days before his return. The silence was absolute, but it was not a silent reverence. It was a silence of absolute skepticism. A student chuckled softly. Another rolled his eyes. "Teacher, this can't be serious," someone said. Another student raised his hand. "So you want us to believe that, after years of teaching that religion was just a psychological mechanism, you now say that God is real and the end is near? I don't want you to believe me, to answer. I want you to seek the truth for yourself." But no one wanted to listen. Journalists started looking for me. At first, I thought it would be an opportunity, but I soon realized who were only interested in ridiculing my experience. The headlines were cruel. Former atheist professor now claims he saw Jesus in an NDE. Delusion or marketing? The strange case of Thatcher Holloway? Miracles or cerebral sequelae? Experts comment. In interviews, they tried to corner me. Don't you think your experience was just a hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain? My answer was always the same. If it was just a hallucination, why is everything I saw starting to happen? But no one wanted to hear that part. They were more concerned with maintaining the narrative that I was just another lunatic preaching the apocalypse. Maddie walks away. The worst part was seeing Maddie start to doubt me. Dad, I'm trying to understand, but you're exposing yourself to unnecessary ridicule. Maddie, I don't care about the ridiculous. I've seen the truth. What if it's just trauma? You almost died. Your brain could have created those images as a survival mechanism. I stared at her. What about the signs? The dawns, the spiritual awakening, the splits, the system collapse. Maddie, everything I've seen has already begun? She was silent, but I saw in his eyes the fear that I was going crazy. She wasn't ready to believe it, and it broke my heart. The conviction that remains I was alone. My career was destroyed. My reputation was ruined. My own daughter was pulling away. But inside me I knew. None of that mattered. We. And I would keep talking. Because time was running out. The days passed. The noise of interviews, mocking headlines, and students whispering about me in the university hallways began to dissipate. I expected that, over time, interest in my story would fade. But what happened was the opposite. The signals began. And suddenly, people were laughing. They were no longer laughing. Time passed. But the experience I lived did not leave me alone. The visions were burned into me like fire. Every detail, every word of Jesus, every image of the last 30 days before his return was imprinted on my soul. But there was one question that haunted me. How could I prove that what I saw was real? I had no evidence. I didn't have a video. I had nothing but my testimony. And yet, I knew it was true. The first thing I noticed after returning was that my perception of the world had changed. It was not a question of knowledge or intelligence. It was as if, somehow, I was seeing beyond the surface of things. Before I analyzed everything rationally, now there was a heaviness to everything around me. When I saw the news, I felt like time was running faster. When I spoke to someone, I realized what was behind the words. The fears, the struggles, the doubts. When I looked at the sky, I knew that he held secrets that humanity did not yet understand. I was no longer in the world in the same way. What impacted me most was the absolute clarity of the experience. Could it have been a delusion? Could it have been a hallucination induced by a lack of oxygen to the brain? If I were the same man as before, I would probably argue exactly that. But something inside me said it wasn't possible. I had felt it. I had been there. I had seen Jesus. And he was more real than anything I had ever experienced in this world. In the days following my discharge, I spent hours remembering every detail. I needed to understand. Why did Jesus show me this? Why me? And then, his last sentence echoed in my mind like thunder. You need to tell the world. It was at that moment that I understood that it didn't matter if people believed it or not. My mission was not to convince them. My mission was to tell why time was running out. And sooner or later, everything I saw would happen. In the days following my recovery, the sense of urgency within me did not decrease. On the contrary, it seemed to grow every day. I was no longer the same. I couldn't be the same. The experience I had, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a fantasy created by my brain. It was real. And the reality of this experience was transforming me from the inside out. I felt overwhelmed. How to carry knowledge that the entire world would reject? When I stood before Jesus, everything was clear. Now, back to the physical world. It was like trying to hold something that slipped between your fingers. His words still echoed in my mind. You need to tell the world. But how? I knew that most people wouldn't believe me. I knew they would call me crazy, that they would try to discredit what I saw, that even those close to me would doubt it. But I also knew that I couldn't stay silent. The feeling of being between two worlds. What scared me most was the feeling that I wasn't completely back yet. Not physically. My body was here. My heart was beating. My breathing was normal. But somehow, I felt like I was still connected to that other place. It was as if my soul had not been able to completely disconnect from what I had seen. I looked at people on the street and felt the weight of eternity in them. I listened to banal conversations and thought, if you knew what was going to happen, would you still talk about it? The weather felt different. Before, the days passed like any other. Now, every minute seemed more urgent. The clock was ticking. The internal transformation. Another strange thing happened. My old arguments, they no longer made sense to me. Before, I saw the world as a mechanical system, governed by natural laws, randomness, and probabilities. Now I saw intention in everything. I saw the presence of God in places where I hadn't seen anything before. The sunset now reminded me of the glory of the Creator. The way the leaves moved in the wind reminded me of the gentle touch of something much larger. The simple fact that be alive, it seemed to carry a meaning that I had previously ignored. I had been transformed. The silence of God. One thing, however, disturbed me. Since I came back, I haven't heard the voice of Jesus anymore. While there, His presence was everything. It was the only thing that mattered. Now back to the physical world, He was silent. Not that I doubted what I saw, not that I expected Him to talk to me all the time, but I felt the absence. And it was in that silence that I began to understand the true test of faith. Jesus had already given me everything I needed. Now it was my turn to act. What do I do now? One night, sitting alone in my house, I closed my eyes and asked the question that hadn't left my mind. Sir, what do I do now? And then, a conviction came over me. I needed to start. Even if no one believed it, even if they made fun of me, even if I lost everything, because I saw the truth, and time was running out. From the moment I accepted my mission, I faced the reality I already anticipated. No one wanted to listen. My academic career was destroyed. My colleagues at university turned their backs on me. My reputation fell apart in days. The interviews I gave were edited to make it seem like I was delusional. I was ridiculed by skeptics and ignored by religious people who didn't want to believe that time was actually running out. Even Maddie, my daughter, started to avoid the subject. She wanted to believe that I was okay, but deep down, he didn't want to accept that his father was now talking about Christ's return. And it was at that moment that I realized the solitude of truth. Jesus had already shown me this. There would be a separation, and many would not accept it until it was too late. I could only keep talking, even if no one listened. Today, I'm here telling this story because it's the only thing I can do. I don't know how much time we have. I don't know the day or the hour, but I know that the last 30 days before Christ's return are already written. I know the world. It's not ready. And I know that when the signs begin, many will remember what they heard, but perhaps there is no more time to change. What I saw was not meant to cause fear. It was to wake up. The question is not when this will happen. The only question that really matters is, will you be ready when it happens? If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.